One, two, three, four! Greetings, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Welcome to our series, Humming a Sickening Tune, where we shall be reviewing every single Ramones song in order alphabetically. The first song we will explore in this series is All Screwed Up from Brain Drain. On paper, the Ramones may have plotted All Screwed Up as a regressive throwback to classic-era fundamentalism, sporting an extremely stripped-down lyric and main verse melody. But while they might have dabbled in classic Ramones simplicity, they failed to apply classic Ramones velocity, and their decision to equip the track with what might be charitably referred to as their stock late middle-aged period hard rock tempo instead of their classic era acceleration results in a 4-minute track which somewhat wears out its welcome. Other counter-conceptual flourishes also detract, and some dubious arrangement decisions add to the clutter overload, such as with the somewhat tacked-on, downward, unrepeated cascade of chords which open the song similar to the style of It's a Long Way Back to Germany. An overbearingly snare-heavy and bass-weak mix certainly don't help. Producer Bill Laswell, around the same time, had been engineering heavy hard rock releases by Iggy Pop, Motorhead, and Public Image Limited. But this is a track where his quasi-metal collaboration with the band fails to connect. Some conspicuously out-of-place kettle drum style floor tom roll embellishments during the not unattractive but still barely necessary middle 8 are as good an example of this as any. On the other hand, and while it might seem preposterous to critique a Ramones lyric for being too repetitive, Joey manages to intone the few phrases proffered often enough to considerably diminish their charms. Even in the interest of replicating minimalism, it was probably unwise for all 3 sections of the track to boast endless invocations of the mantra "baby, baby" quite so endlessly. We are, in the end, left with a track which one wants to admire conceptually, but finally fails to adhere to the pretexts of its own internal orthodoxies effectively enough to do anything other than outlast the appeal of its own modest merits. My least favorite thing about this track? Well, I counted, and Joey says the word baby 58 times in this song. My favorite thing about this track, well, I'd have to say that it's the out-of-character and unrepeated lyric in which Joey upfront and unexpectedly proclaims, opening the final verse, that, quote, "I love the music business, but it makes me sick," unquote. Hey, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for checking out the clip. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, so I hope you like my playing. But if you'd like to hear the original track, I will put up a link in the description. Please let me know what you think of All Screwed Up, and please subscribe to join us for the next edition where we will be looking at All the Way from End of the Century. Today we will be discussing All the Way from End of the Century.
All the Way is one of the only songs in the Ramones catalog whose title does not figure into the lyrics of the track. So what exactly does All the Way mean? About to star in their own Roger Corman-produced feature film, and embarking on a major recording project with veteran producer Phil Spector, did they dare hope their time had finally arrived to go all the way to the top of success? Or did they envision a future where they might go all the way the entirety of their career without truly achieving it? The pessimistic lyrics would seem to lean towards the latter. With bubbles about to burst in the doomsday of 1981, the band sounds ill-equipped to face even the end of the decade, much less the end of the century. The song commences with an out-of-the-ordinary, mid-tempo hard rock march intro, but this quickly gives way to the LP's only 1, 2, 3, 4, which would seem to indicate that at least for this track, it will be the band's fundamentals and not Spector's excesses, which we'll be calling the shots. Playing to their strengths, the band mostly moves around familiar changes in 1-4-5. But interestingly, at the end of each verse, they employ a 2-5-1 turnaround, a melodic device which appears regularly in country, folk, even blues and jazz, and their utilization of it unthinkingly and probably unintentionally connects the band to the sturdy traditions of their music's roots. This move features on the earlier Blitzkrieg Bop, which we will discuss later in more depth. They also employ another early favorite device, with Johnny starting in a low register and climbing up through the changes, while Dee Dee begins up high and swoops down simultaneously, which causes an effect of an uneasy center where only the blinding precision of their playing maintains focus. And it must be said that the still relatively new band member Marky propels this track very admirably. They lyrically engage in another well-worn habit, imbuing a seemingly cartoonish word salad with pertinent autobiographical details. Hearing life on the road equated with a stint in the armed forces surely evokes military school dropout Johnny's authoritarian grasp over the band, and it is impossible to hear an allusion to a stint in the sanitarium without conjuring images of Joey's adolescence. But probable lyricist Dee Dee captures the grimmest prediction of them all. I'm never going to live to get old. Unfortunately, resonant not only for him, but the entire original lineup. All of this camouflaged in a seemingly semi-standard set of prose about touring drudgery, a topic it shares with another end-of-the-century highlight, Danny Says. Later in their career, attempting to appear more appreciative, the band would tackle this subject in songs like It's Gonna Be Alright, Touring, and the little-known gem Perfect Day. But the connected songwriting always came off as a bit forced, somewhat unconvincing, a smidge contrived, failing to hourly convey the celebration somehow. Whereas earlier on this album, where they were more upfront and honest about their weariness, the frustrations were coupled with music, on one hand with Danny Says, which ironically achieved an unprecedented majestic transcendence, and on the other hand here with All the Way, which unexpectedly captured and encapsulated and exemplified all the way their pure accelerated sonic exhilaration. What do I like least about this track? Well, this is a Phil Spector record with horn sections and orchestrations, and yes, later in their career, the Ramones might sully tracks with dubious synthesizers and keyboards. But it must be said, the noodly, whittly guitar overdubs on this and other tracks, likely supplied by Spector's standard session guitarist sidemen, the Kessel Brothers, represents some of the most aesthetically out-of-character production flourishes on any of the band's records. And it's certainly the most galling example which is actually played on a guitar. And what do I like best about this track? Well, On top of everything else I've discussed about this underappreciated gem, the lyric, this list of touring grievances, takes time out to name drop the Ramones' real-life, beleaguered tour manager, Monty Melnick. One of the only members of the Ramones' peripheral circle to be honored in such a fashion, a fact which was not lost on him even in recent interviews. I mean, this dude was a behind-the-scenes hero. He was around for the band's inception all the way to the end of their careers. So let's wrap up this review by simply stating, yes, Melnicks. If you have not read his book, On the Road with the Ramones yet, get to that quick, because it is the best book about the Ramones that has been written and probably ever will be written.
Hey, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for checking out the clip. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, so I hope you like my playing. But if you'd like to hear the original track, I will put up a link in the description.
Please let me know what you think of All the Way down in the comments. Next up on Humming a Sickening Tune, All's Quiet on the Eastern Front from Pleasant Dreams. Today on Humming a Sickening Tune, we shall discuss All's Quiet on the Eastern Front from Pleasant Dreams. A titular reference to European literature is not the first thing that jumps to mind when one brings up a Ramones track from the 80s, but Erich Maria Remarque's All's Quiet on the Western Front's evocation of World War I trench warfare, danger, and desperation translated well into Dee Dee's portrayal of New York City haunts and hunts throughout the Big Apple's subterranean jungles, if you will. One mustn't forget the young Douglas Colvin was raised as an Air Force brat in Germany, and the resonant source material elevated his street poetry, metaphorically capturing the primal alleyway prowls of the addict and the maneuvers of his motivations. Such is embodied in the enigmatic and oft-repeated catchphrase Dee Dee himself specifically intones, "Can't you see my movements talk?" This was the third album in a row in which the band attempted to expand the palette of their sound into what they clearly hoped would be a more commercially successful realm. But the often dubious conceptual choices of Graham Goldman, who may have composed several classic pop hits in the 60s but was currently a member of the pretentious art rock band 10cc, pushed the band even further away from their comfortable sonic turf than even Phil Spector had previously dared. All's Quiet is something of an exception, however, with only some uncharacteristically quasi-tribal, even world-beatish percussion propelling the song. And a surprising but satisfying key change coda, a detail which is not present on either the early demo of the song or any of the subsequent live versions, marking the taint of likely outsider input. There's also a fascinating extra couple of instrumental measures which precipitate the first verse. Quite odd that this occurs only one time, but indeed this detail did appear in the group's early versions of the track, and debatably might have perhaps been more effective if it had remained on the primary rhythm instead of prematurely jumping to the secondary verse beat. A fleeting unique detour for certain. Yet, overall, this stands definitively as the most satisfyingly primitive track the troublingly over-arranged Pleasant Dreams offers. All's Quiet on the Eastern Front is cluttered by merely a minimal amount of production spice interference, and it remains one of the LP's only tracks whose ambitions do not outstrip the abilities or usurp the parameters of the band's aesthetic.
What do I like least about this track? Well, this is certainly not a complaint you're going to hear very often on this channel, but Joey's vocal on this track really must be called a disappointment. His performance is undermined by a surprising air of relative indifference, with several questioningly passive flourishes and phrasing diluting the results of what certainly had the potential to be a tour de force, what with the rich wordplay presented by the track's tableau. And what do I like most about this track? Well, speaking of the lyrics' literary bent, I truly savor the verse, which alludes in a somewhat Clockwork Orangey style slang speak to, quote, smoky air, shaky locks, and kicky doors, unquote. This is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for listening and watching. Please let me know in the comments what you think of All's Quiet on the Eastern Front. I'll be talking to you again soon. Up next, we'll be discussing the title track from Animal Boy.
Today, we shall be discussing the title track to Animal Boy. As the sexually ambiguous, art student-tinged first wave of punk slowly morphed by the 80s into the more testosterone-driven mosh pit aggression of thrash and hardcore, the Ramones surprisingly found themselves, despite being crowned kings of the genre, as seeming too pop compared to the groups which were then spearheading the fresh scenes. And with the genre experiments and celebrity production stunts of the previous two LPs coming to very little, the band determined to reassert their fundamental sound, first with Subterranean Jungle, and then on Too Tough to Die, with Dee Dee's breathtaking freak-out Endless Vacation, beginning a streak where they would devote one track per album towards addressing and matching the headlong velocity of the burgeoning hardcore scene, a pattern which they continued on their releases until their career came to an end. And with the title track of Animal Boy, the band achieved what may be their apex in this realm. The track kicks off with a pushy barrage of rhythm guitars given a quasi-metal sheen by the LP's producer Jean Beauvoir of the Plasmatics, but quickly launches into a powder keg of pressurized velocity, sizzlingly mixed into a dazzling sonic barrage. A sort of theme of animal, freakish, or subhuman subjects currents throughout the LP, with Ape-Man Hop, Eat That Rat, Freak of Nature, etc. And even George Zabos's LP cover photo pictures the group among a simian throng, including one gorilla suit disguising ex-Punk magazine co-creator and resident punk Legs McNeil, believe it or not. And this track seems to crystallize this preponderance. It notably appears as the only lyric revealed on an inner sleeve, split between yet more human oddity imagery and collective portraits of Ramones' fundamentalism, such as leather jackets, guitar picks, drumsticks, and perhaps underlining the prevalent determination, a set of weights. The words certainly did not seem to have been overthought, but as usual they are adorned with allusions to autobiographical hints, with zoos and cages evoking true incarceration, and the imbecilic brain damage evocations of true institutionalizations, and the stated outright screaming for vengeance evoking the truest depths of misanthropic alienation. The track zealously bullet trains through its changes, truly one of the band's most physically demanding, with video bootlegs of the era pointedly capturing Johnny wiping the sweat off of his hands before charging into the track's intro, and technically impressive performances, with especially Richie tossing in some flashes of flair, effortlessly steering the group into its whiplash-inducing, slower, heavy section. And here, the thematic couplets finally hit ground zero of the thematic punchline, none other than a quote from John, that is to say Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man. album full of impressive genre experiments, this steely stab at keeping up with the pack displays assuredly that even with teams of more youthful guns itching on adrenalized triggers, boy, this old dog was clearly an animal capable of picking up a few new tricks. What do I like least about this track? When you think about the Ramones recordings that are too incongruously 80s-ish, Howling at the Moon from Too Tough to Die, produced by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, or Chop Suey from the soundtrack to Get Crazy jump to mind. But I think you'd have to say Jean Beauvois's mix of Animal Boy runs a close third. And I don't want to overstate this. I think, of course, overall, the LP could be worse. And on this track, particularly Animal Boy, it's hardly a problem at all. But I think if you compare the hardcore style tracks of records that have a more appropriate mix, that the only way this track could be improved would be to have a sort of more hard rock crunch than it does. But really, I'm quibbling. I think as the Ramones are exiting the middle section of their careers into the latter era, this stands as one of their indisputably definitive tracks. What do I like best about this track? Well, can I just say how sad it is that John Merrick is known by his incorrect name because his best friend, Frederick Treves, who lifted him out of squalor and into infamy, could not learn his correct name. Joseph, how sad it is that your best friend cannot even learn your correct name, right? But anyway, I always considered David Lynch's film Elephant Man a kind of update on the emotional terrain of the film Freaks. So I think it's really interesting that the Ramones, who built a definitive track of theirs, Pinhead, around the ethos of the earlier film, chose in the later part of their career to compose an update of the same sort of ideas based upon the ideas of the later film. The Ramones retooled I'm Not an Animal Boy. Why don't they understand? Don't treat me like an animal. You don't know what it's like, and you don't know how I feel. I am not an animal. Co-opted from Merrick's archetypal declaration of self-determination. I am not an animal. I am a human being. I am a man. Greetings, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed my playing. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, but I will put up a link to the real track in the description below. In the comments, please let me know what you think of Animal Boy. Coming up next on Humming a Sickening Tune will be Anxiety from Mondo Bizarro. Today on Humming a Sickening Tune, Anxiety from Mondo Bizarro. The stigma and tribulations of mental illness have been a conceptual focus for the Ramones ever since they began. Their forthright honesty and demented comedy, which they brought to all manner of dementia, were a fundamental foundation of the band's appeal to their fans. One might recall the blink and you'll miss it moment in the video they produced for Psychotherapy, where the band is pictured alongside their mental diagnoses, and one could, without too much rearrangement, reorganize the maladies to correspond to their more applicable band member. But as their initial humor moved in their latter era to a more hard-boiled, resilient realism, they felt more conflicted about the way they might approach this topic. The surprisingly weak and ineffective attempts to inject some lightheartedness into the proceedings clashed heavily with the song's more obviously, prevalently bleak mood. Anxiety appeared on Mondo Bizarro, which reunited the band with their early engineer Ed Stasium. But it failed to match the triumph of the earlier Too Tough to Die, which featured a reunion with Tommy Ramone at the producer's chair.
They clearly strove to check off as many boxes in the seeming Ramones trope list as possible, but despite a sonically satisfying and sharp result, the project feels uneven and off the mark in its attempts to capture its self-conscious aims, and this track is a good example. Co-written by Marky with his longtime collaborator Skinny Bones, the song is the least satisfying the Ramones attempted in the hardcore idiom. It is fast and simple, but not really the Ramones style of fast and simple. Even the opening drum beat is more Gimme 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 by Black Flag than Rock and Roll High School. With a thrown-together, afterthought middle eight grafted on, and an out-of-character, anti-aesthetic, quasi-metal guitar solo, the song sounds like it would be more comfortable on a Marky solo LP than a proper Ramones record. And indeed, it did appear on the first Intruders record featuring Skinny Bones that Marky released after the band broke up. The general air of uncertainty and lack of cohesion is underlined by a lame late attempt at a throwback spell-along chant, which concretely illustrates how far the band has fallen from the effortless confidence of benchmark early classics such as Pinhead. Nevertheless, despite all of this, as the 2000s began and the prevalent societal melees congealed, the song became something of an unexpected underdog anthem favorite for the new millennium generation, suffering from the freshly ingrained anxieties felt by those born past the last end of the century. What do I like least about this track? Well, the Ramones are my all-time favorite band, and there's something I love about almost everything that they recorded. But I would probably rank Anxiety amongst the top or bottom 10 of their least effective tracks. Of all the shortcomings I've already delineated, it is this feeble attempt at levity in the line, "Anxiety keeps me happy," which most severely lessens the song's impact. Anxiety, I Can't Be Happy would have delivered on the band's latter-day brutal pessimistic realism, and it would have been perhaps better syllabically to say, "Anxiety, I'll Never Be Happy." And the next time you listen to this song, keep these variations in mind, and I think that you will hear what I mean. What do I like most about this song? Well, in the 1995 documentary Hype, which concerns itself with the Seattle grunge scene, Leighton Beazer of the Thrown Ups gives a short demonstration of the primary difference between the prevalent chord pattern in punk versus the prevalent two-chord pattern in grunge, which are the same things, simply reversed. And this is a little bit sideways, but I've always been amused by the fact that the two primary changes in Anxiety are variants on these two examples. And while I doubt that this is where the idea for the music to this song sprung from, it is an interesting aside, and I will put a link to the clip in the movie below in the description. And this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed my playing. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes. I will put a link to the real track in the description below. Please, in the comments below, let me know what you think of Anxiety. Coming up next on Humming a Sickening Tune, their cover of the Dave Clark Five's Any Way You Want It. Today on Humming a Sickening Tune, Any Way You Want It from Greatest Hits Live. Initially, in their cover version tributes, the Ramones made a concerted effort to align themselves specifically with the post-50s, pre-Beatles, goofy pop American aesthetic. Even the early British invasion aberration Needles and Pins has its roots as a Sonny Bono composition in early 60s American cheese kitsch.
and it was not until their cover of Time Has Come Today by the Chambers Brothers on Subterranean Jungle and the Rolling Stones' Street Fighting Man during the Too Tough to Die sessions, and finally the acclamation on their all-covers release Acid Eaters that they fully embraced an interest in any music which had been produced beyond the year 1963 or beyond the American shores. Unlike the Rolling Stones, who were tangibly posited as the more sinister, darker response to the Beatles, the Dave Clark Five, or the DC-5 for those in the know, were branded as competition primarily to the goofier components of the perceived early Beatles fandom, that is, an inordinate focus on an appealing and only occasionally singing drummer, and an emphasis on simplistic beats and arrangements, which would remain unsurpassed until the Troggs crystallized proto-garage rock primitivism as an approach. Indeed, one can only scoff and chuckle at their repeated assertion in their cover of the Contours' Do You Love Me that, quote, "we can do the blues," unquote. The original recording, which was a top 10 hit, is carried primarily through the novelty of its excessive use of echo and reverb. The Ramones make only a passing attempt to replicate the appeal of this sonic flavor, but their lackadaisical copycat only underlines the composition's threadbare elemental attributes. And concurrently, their negligible engagement. Ironically, one must defer to the earlier cover by Kiss from the studio side 4 of Alive 2 for a version which truly embraces the track's spirit. The song appears on their lamentably half-baked late-career cash-in entitled Greatest Hits Live. Could there possibly be a lamer title for a record? Along with, thankfully, their recording of the Motorhead tribute Ramones, the only version with Joey performing the lead vocal, were tossed in as obvious collector bait extras. After the career-defining It's Alive and the later already kind of dodgy Loco Live, this was easily the most embarrassing money grab committed by the band and their management while they were still a functional unit. Their take of Any Way You Want It was seemingly concocted as a blueprint for a secret weapon final stage exit curveball, although they barely included the song in their sets, even in the weeks leading up to the climax of their final tour. The end result, Greats, as one of the most half-hearted, most passively interested examples of cover tribute influence, quote, celebration, unquote, the band ever committed to wax. What do I like least about this song? Well, I suppose it is the schism that exists between the Ramones' seeming lack of engagement with the track versus the place that they gave it in their history, according it an almost venerated position, making it, during a period when oddball set inclusions were a distinct rarity, the absolute last song that they performed at their absolute last show, even trotting out Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam in a pinhead mask, clearly on the basis of his buddyship with Johnny, to warble along in a mumbly fashion. An oddly inexplicable, seemingly inappropriate choice for so crucial a moment. On the bright side, Joey resurrected the track at perhaps his coolest post-breakup performance with his band The Resistance at an Indian reservation. I will put a link to this astonishing gig in the description below. What do I like best about this song? Well, make no mistake, aside from a possible 6 minor change, on paper, this looks like a perfect song for the Ramones to cover. A repetitive, stripped-down example of energetic pop that should have fit the band's aesthetic to a T. In fact, they clearly lifted, without too much alteration, the 4-1, 2-5-1 turnaround middle section for reappropriation into the almost identical bridge of Blitzkrieg Bop.
which makes it only the more baffling that in retrospect, it is the recording by Kiss, which stands as surely the more knowing, definitive version. Hey, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. I hope you enjoyed my playing. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, but I will put a link to the real track in the description below. And please let me know in the comments what you think of their version of Any Way You Want It. Coming up next on Humming a Sickening Tune, 8-Man Hop. Today on Humming a Sickening Tune, 8-Man Hop from Animal Boy. The Ramones were funny. Upon initial shock public reaction, this was often overlooked. And while their humor could be twisted, if not often outright offensive, in retrospect, it is the dementia of their sickly humorous view of reality which endures as one of their most endearing traits. But as their early style of comedy gave way in their latter years to a somewhat more embittered and hard-boiled worldview, the attempts at humor became farther and farther in between, and such latter-day stabs at levity, such as Heidi is a Head Case, or Cabbies on Crack, or Worm Man, come off as contrived and self-conscious, and not really all that amusing. However, on 8-Man Hop from the LP Animal Boy, they captured the delicious weirdness of their early glee for just about the last time. Sungawi, Uga Buga, Matsuana Tsumunga, Buana Buana, Patsuana. Animal Boy, with its keyboard dabbling, processed guitar tones and solos, minor key melodies, and distinctly varied genre palette, certainly stands looking back as the band's final, seriously ambitious LP of original material. But fascinatingly, through the smorgasbord of styles, they make a concerted effort to check off the list boxes, with a batch of punkish tunes clearly designed to play up to their obvious strengths and fulfill audience expectations, which might be put off by this offering's less stripped down and yes, more commercial leanings. And from the hilarious Guna Guna jungle adventure opening to an almost disturbingly engaged vocal emphasizing the lyric's absurdity, through the indecipherable yelling which accompanies the appealing idiocy of the joyously dumb chorus, until Joey halting the final tropical cave dweller echo with one more burp bleat of hop. It's just a blast. Certainly not a top-tier contender in the wide arc of their work, but undeniably a savorable final flash of effortlessly hilarious, twisted fun. What do I like least about this track? Well, let's face facts. This song takes the title of one of their most beloved hits, changes Cretin to 8-Man, grabs the verse riff of another early classic, Commando, and tags on barely a secondary part, which is merely the root key with a 2-fret shift down for the simplest chorus possible. All of this on a record which appeared concerned with a concerted effort towards creatively and expansively experimenting with other sonic textures. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that what I like least about this song is that it's appallingly, gallingly lazy, which would be an affront if the song didn't succeed so amusingly and easily on its own merits. With another artist, what might be dismissed as a half-hearted rehash, with the Ramones, you simply want to admirably applaud that they could still adhere to the primitive tenets of their initial aesthetic. As always with the band, a negative becomes a positive and a shortcoming becomes a strength. And what do I like best about this song? Well, according to legend, or rumor, or a quote whose source I can no longer remember, I'm telling you, I'm not making this up out of thin air, though. I did write about this exact anecdote in 2014. I just can't remember where I heard it. Jean Beauvois is asked about his experience manning the boards recording the Animal Boys sessions. And he recalls that for this song, for the Tribal Cinema Verite Jungle Movie intro, he was actually asked if he would be interested in participating recording the dialogue, an offer which unsurprisingly he reveals that he did not take them up on.
Yogi ko buta ko juju ko monat.
Kalabanga Ungawa. And absolutely my favorite thing about this song, and I don't know who it was, but I tip my hat to whoever in the control room at that moment had the fucking balls to ask the bass player of the Plasmatics if he'd be willing to go record a couple seconds of booga booga native speak for the introduction to this song. I salute your balls, my friend. Hey, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my playing. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, but I will put a link to the real track in the description below. In the comments, please let me know what you think of 8-Man Hop. Coming up next on Humming a Sickening Tune, Baby I Love You from End of the Century. Greetings, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. You know, when I first embarked on this project, reviewing every single Ramones song in alphabetical order, there were sort of two sidetrack detours I was hoping to also include as we went along. I, of course, also wanted to review every LP, also in alphabetical order as we went. And this presented something of a problem because there is a logjam of Ramones albums that all begin with the letter A in their title, and I didn't want to front load the reviews with a whole bunch of LPs at the beginning. So I roughly compiled a list of 20 or 30 of the Ramones releases that I wanted to discuss, full-length releases, and I decided that I would merely pepper one of these at a time as we reach the end of one letter in the song reviews. The first one today will be for Acid Eaters, and as we get through the rest of the letters, as we complete each letter, I'll go on to another album review, so on and so forth. The second thing I wanted to do was also to maintain a running song tier list. Just thought it might be fun to rank the songs as we were going. And so after the review, I will go ahead and begin this song tier list. I thought about making them separate videos, but I think mostly the tier lists are going to be pretty short, and just thought it would be cool to combine them. So as we go along, we'll finish one letter, then there'll be a video like this, and we'll continue on to the next letter. So on and so forth. So first today, Acid Eaters. For the first chapter of their career, the Ramones exclusively focused their choice of cover material on the pre-Beatles, early 60s American cheesy pop sound aesthetic. It was not until Needles and Pins on Road to Ruin did the band broach the possibility of paying tribute to mid-60s British invasion sounds. And not until Subterranean Jungle did they definitively begin to betray their interest in the psychedelicized garage rock sound of the later stretch of the decade. The apex of this interest flowered in their 1993 album Acid Eaters, ironically appearing in a period after the majority of original members had either gotten sober or were at least no longer willing to joke about drug abuse in their lyrics. Their second release of the CJ era sprung from the idea of recording a few hippie-era tracks to flesh out the CD single of their cover of The Doors' Take It As It Comes from Mondo Bizarro. When their initial efforts proved successful enough to fill up an entire EP, it was elected for the results to be expanded into album length for the next project. All covers albums were one of the drearier prevalent trends for musicians in the 90s, along with acoustic unplugged LPs, star-studded artist tributes, and albums full of celebrity friend duets. and the band's decision to chase this trend could justifiably trigger some warranted pessimism regarding their seemingly half-hearted desperation. Thus, it was quite a shock when the release was revealed to be an energetic, varied, and enjoyable offering. Matched with an outsider but importantly not stunt celebrity name producer, the album presented the band ambitiously experimenting with the expansive flexibility of their sound for just about the last time. Named after an extremely cheesy 1967 LSD trip movie, this is all captured along with an LP cover design which wisely harkens back to the stylized cartoon humor of their early years. It is absolutely their last aesthetic cover artwork triumph amidst a long stretch of dubiously wrong-headed vinyl portraiture missteps, if not disasters. It is difficult to peruse the track list and not get excited at the prospect of hearing the Ramones honor such clear antecedents as the Troggs, the Seeds, and the Rolling Stones, but they hurl a few unexpected curveballs, taking on the likes of CCR, Love, and even Bob Dylan. The diabolical 7 and 7 Is by Love is tackled admirably, although they predictably omit the post-apocalyptic blues jams at the end. And My Back Pages seems to have been considered primarily out of Johnny's spite for Zimmerman. But finally, the band the Ramones secretly owe the most, the Beach Boys, finally gets their due, as the album closes with the Brian Wilson-penned Surf City by Jan and Dean. Although on the Japanese editions, you got a full-fledged Beach Boys cover of Surfin' Safari. A few named guest stars add very little to the goings-on. Pete Townshend's negligible contribution to their Who cover of Substitute unfortunately resulted in the band opting to make that the release's single, despite superior choices being peppered all around. And the appearance of ex-porn star Tracy Lords on their cover of Jefferson Airplane's Somebody to Love, easily the album's low point, appears to have been primarily motivated by the fact that she and the band were currently sharing management and therefore label alliance. Beyond that, the primary criticism which could be leveled would be the designation of 25% of the album's lead vocals being doled out to the new bassist. Notably, a majority of the album's up-tempo tracks, and surprisingly, its opening song, Journey to the Center of the Mind. Joey's emotional vocal on their breathtakingly brisk Have You Ever Seen the Rain by John Fogerty makes it easy to wonder and long to have heard his take on a meatier chunk of the album's fast tracks. Post-breakup revelations show Johnny strategizing, giving the new member more vocals in the order to give Joey a break during live sets. And I can tell you firsthand, I caught them on the Acid Eaters tour and was amazed that CJ was given no less than 6 or 7 songs to front. Which all brings us to perhaps Acid Eaters' most intriguing, beguiling attribute. I am not the first reviewer of this album to note how many of the tracks address lost youth and the fears of what lies in the future after it is gone. Out of Time, The Shape of Things to Come, My Back Pages, they all create a fascinating, serious undercurrent which runs beneath what would seem on appearances to be a lighthearted romp through the soundtrack of the band members' adolescence. But nowhere does this hit harder than on their devastating retooling of the Animals' When I Was Young, one of the Ramones' most under-heralded, secretly potent triumphs. The unexpected late quality of Acid Eaters finds the Ramones utilizing the energetic lunacy of their teenage psychedelia in order to better grapple with the brutal concerns of their hard, middle-aged reality. 7 out of 10. Which brings us to the Humming a Sickening Tune tier list. For the letter A, we're going to be dividing up the levels here. Absolute Ramones classics will be Gimme Gimme. Great tracks will be Rock Rock. Good tracks will be I Wanna. Kinda tracks are You're Gonna. And really lousy, objectionable Ramones tracks, of which I honestly think there are very few, will be listed under I Don't Wanna. All right, here we go. All Screwed Up from Brain Drain. You know, it's too slow. He says baby too much. There's too many parts. I'm going to say You're Gonna. Wah. Let's see here. All the Way from End of the Century. You know, I really think this is one of the least appreciated, really strong tracks from End of the Century, except for the highly unacceptable guitar wanking solo leads that were overdubbed by somebody, right? I think this song really kicks, and I think the hard rock intro is awesome, and it name drops Monty. It talks about their life on tour. I think this one's great. This is going in rock. Let's see. All's Quiet on the Eastern Front. I think rhythmically this is really different. A nice little experiment. The lyric certainly is great. But somehow this just doesn't take off for me, man. But I like it. I'm gonna go in I Wanna. Let's see, Animal Boy from Animal Boy. Well, obviously this is one of the more successful experiments in the hardcore idiom for the band. Definitely, I think most people would say it's one of the best ones. It's certainly a standout track from that album. Super energetic. Probably could have been slightly funnier, but it's still a totally stripped down archetypal lyric for the band. And hats off to the Elephant Man reference. I'm gonna put this one in rock. Let's see. Oh no, which brings us to Anxiety. Which is probably one of their least successful experiments in the hardcore idiom. The vocal is not really too happening on this one. The lyrics are not great. Spelling out the word doesn't really work. It's just not a great melody. You know, this is a truthfully one of my least favorite Ramones tracks. That is going down in I Don't Wanna. I know it's certainly in the modern era, it has a lot more resonance for the teenage mindset, but no, sorry, I don't wanna. Wah. And let's see, Any Way You Want It, their cover of the Dave Clark 5 that they included on Greatest Hits Live. That was certainly one of the best reasons to buy that CD. But as I noted in my review, it should be perfect for them, but somehow the recording just does not 100% connect. And if you're a Kiss fan and you have a live too, then you know that it's nowhere near as good as their version, which is extremely bizarre, even for me. But it's not bad. I don't know. I guess I'm going with You're Gonna. And let's see, and that brings us to 8-Man Hop. 8-Man Hop from Animal Boy. Definitely one of their last really funny tracks. One of the last ones with funny sound effects. The lyrics hilarious. Obviously, it's just commando with different words. But, you know, it's the sort of self-referential, like, humor that I think they could have, like, leaned on harder. It's a cool track. I really like this one. I'm going to go with I Wanna. Okay, so there you go. There's the first step of the tier. At the end of every letter, we'll do another video like this after we wrap up the next letter, B, and how I'm looking forward to B. You got your Blitzkrieg Bobs, you got your Bonzos, you got your Beat on Your Brats. Although, unfortunately, we're starting off with Baby, I Love You. But looking forward to B nonetheless. Some of my favorite songs. And after that one wraps up, we'll be doing another tier list, and we will be reviewing their final record, Adios Amigos. Thanks for listening, and thanks for subscribing. Appreciate you all's interest. Be talking to you again soon. 1, 2, 3, 4.